It's the perfect time for some cafecito. Let's dive into the next discussion, Building Back Better, Time for Climate Action. The impacts of climate change continue to harm, displace, and create instability in our communities, and the time for action is now. As we move forward into a new era amid COVID-19, how can governments, businesses, and community leaders build resilient and sustainable communities? What is the current situation of the global fight against climate change and the needed action to achieve a net zero economy? Together, we will learn about initiatives, bills, and solutions that ensure that the Latino community is not left behind. Taking action on climate change now will give us the opportunity to build a better future for our communities and environment. Moderating today's discussion is Esther Sosa, a project manager at the Environmental Defense Fund. Good afternoon, Esther.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's conversation. I'm very excited to talk about a very pressing issue that we have and we've been talking a lot about. My name is Esther Sosa, and I work for the Environmental Defense Fund, where I lead our diverse partnerships group to bring in people who are interested in the environmental movement and really figuring out how these topics intersect, from immigration to housing to economic issues, and how they fit into the greater climate movement. As we know, over the past few years, we have seen weather become more extreme. Wildfires in California and the West Coast, extreme heat in the South, tornadoes, hurricanes in the East. A few weeks ago, a report by over 100 independent scientists from around the world confirmed our fears. Climate change is here. It is not a problem of the future. It is a problem affecting every region of the world today. This is all unfolding against the backdrop of a new administration that has made clear that they believe these changes in climate are man-made, and that we will use our resources as a nation to figure out a solution. To shed some light on these issues and how they are affecting our communities and what those solutions could look like, I'm so excited to be engaging in a very timely conversation with two people who have been thinking about this problem way before it became popular. And I thank LULAC for convening us today and having this a very important conversation as part of their summit. Joining me today, I have Magana, who founded GreenLatinos, where he currently serves as president and CEO, an organization that brings together Latino environmental and conservation champions fighting against climate change and environmental degradation, which we know intensifies systemic, social, health, and economic injustices in our communities. They use their cultural connections, shared resources, and collective power to advocate for our environmental justice priorities and the environmental liberation of our communities. Mark was the first Latino to serve as senior staff at both the White House and in congressional leadership, as special assistant to President Clinton for White House Legislative Affairs, and senior policy advisor to the House Democratic Caucus Vice Chair Robert Mendez. He currently proudly serves on many boards, including the League of Conservation Voters, National Hispanic Leadership Agenda, Green 2.0, and the Children's Environmental Health Network. Welcome, Mark. And we also have Dr. Robert Bullard, who is known in the environmental justice community as the father of environmental justice. Dr. Bullard is currently a distinguished professor of urban planning and environmental policy at Texas Southern University. His goal is to ensure that everyone has a clean environment where they can thrive. He's the recipient of many distinguished awards, which I won't go into because there's so many. But most recently, the UN's Environmental Program, Champions of the Earth Lifetime Achievement Award. Congratulations. And he's the author of over 18 books in this field. So with that, we have so many things to talk about. Thank you both for joining us today. And the first, I think I want to start with you, Mark. And I want to ask how in your work you have seen global warming impacting Latino communities across the US. Help us set the stage.
Well, thank you, Esther. And it's great to be with you this afternoon. My name is Mark Magana, and I'm coming to you today from Boulder, Colorado, the occupied territory of the Ute, the Cheyenne, and the Arapaho. I also want to thank LULAC, Cindy Benavides, Domingo Garcia, and the rest of the LULAC family for pulling together this important Cafecito. LULAC has been a visionary, one of the first national Latino organizations to get involved in work on the environment, conservation, and climate. The EPA just announced their decision to remove the dangerous pesticide chlorpyrifos, shown to cause brain damage in children, from the market within the next 6 months. LULAC was a lead plaintiff in the legal action leading up to the initial EPA decision to remove the pesticide from the market, and so this was a victory for all of us. But I'm also really here to hear from Dr. Bullard, most often referred to, as you mentioned, the original godparent of environmental justice. So I'm excited about that as well. But to get back to your question about the biggest issues on climate facing Latino communities, overall, the climate crisis, the weather-related changes and disasters, the overall environmental degradation, they're no longer theoretical problems facing our communities. They're a clear and present danger to Latino community and frontline communities of color broadly. We often have theoretical conversations about greenhouse gases and SOx and NOx and melting polar ice caps, and all of that's true and it's important and it's real, but we must start centering these conversations around people and essential workers, like the farm workers who are working and many of them dying in record-breaking heat just to provide food for our tables. The construction workers that are building houses and building the infrastructure that we're working on now, they have to wear face masks due to pollution and masks. And then when you consider globally the mass climate migration, so people from the southern hemisphere, from Latin America, that are being forced to move because the change in weather, the droughts, the flooding, is making it impossible for them to live. They're not looking for a better life. They're looking to survive with their children. They can no longer grow their subsistence crops, the beans, the rice, the corn that they depended on. These are the big issues that are facing our community right now. And there is good news, which I hope we'll talk about, that we can actually do something about it starting this year. But thank you for having this discussion, and I look forward to hearing from Dr. Bullard.
Thank you, Mark. I agree, this pesticide ban, we've been waiting for it for a long time, and I'm very glad that it passed. And like that, we have so many more that we know affect our children, but also our farm workers who are consistently exposed to these terrible toxins. Dr. Bullard, as we mentioned, you are the father of environmental justice. Can you tell us how these issues connect? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, thanks, Esther. And again, as Mark said, I also want to thank LULAC for having this important, timely discussion, and also thank them for inviting me and to engage. What I've tried to do in working with frontline communities is to try to support and to try to at least clearly define how and show with research, science, data, and with knowledge, indigenous knowledge from communities, how these things connect. And what over the last 40 years, we've redefined what environmentalism is and what the environment is. The environment is not just out there, you know, wetlands and wildlands and things that are so distant from us, where we live, work, play, learn, worship, as well as the physical and natural world. And so I think when we started to push this redefinition of the environment and who is an environmentalist, and that issues around justice is so important, that for a long time, when we were talking about issues around health and issues around workers, issues around livability in our communities, around transportation issues, around housing, a lot of the environmental groups said, no, we don't work on social issues. And so our response was, breathing is not social. Most people don't decide next Wednesday, I'm not going to breathe, or I'm not going to drink water, or I'm not going to eat food, or I'm not going to go to work. So when we talk about this, how things connect, we have forced this issue onto the national stage, from small frontline grassroots organizations that basically see their communities somehow being threatened by industrial facilities, or by flooding, or not being given equal protection when it comes to other kinds of issues, such as something as simple as a park, something as simple as a grocery store, something as simple as having our children not have to cross busy streets and highways to get to where they need to get to, such as school. And so I think our movement has brought justice from a footnote, from these grassroots struggles, all the way to a headline in 2021, to reach the White House and to reach those congresspersons who are now saying, no, these issues are so important that we can't kick the can down the road. And young people are saying, no, Dr. Bullard, we do not want to wait 40 years like you working on this stuff, you know, making these little baby steps, incremental steps. They're saying we want transformative change. And the urgency of now, that climate change, or this climate crisis, as Mark said, it's not theory. Our communities are being flooded out. Our communities are burning with wildfires. And our workers right now, and if you look at who's most likely to work outside, I mean, Latinos represent a huge proportion. People of color represent a huge proportion of outdoor workers. The Union of Concerned Scientists just came out with a report that outdoor workers are 31% more likely to suffer from some type of heat illness or heat effect. And if you talk about what's the worst or the biggest health impact of climate, heat. And so when we talk about making sure that we just don't talk about greenhouse gases and parts per million, we have to talk about vulnerability, we have to talk about justice, and we have to talk about policies that go to the heart of that. A lot of talk right now is talking about infrastructure, physical infrastructure, that's roads, bridges, dams, reservoirs, and other things like that, hard construction. And if you look at the American Society of Chemical Engineers, the infrastructure that were given D minuses, well, American infrastructure was given a GPA, grade point average, of C minus. But if you look at those infrastructures that got D minuses, many of them are in Latino communities and communities of color. Whether we're talking about waste, or we talk about schools, we talk about parks, we talk about bridges, we talk about all those hard infrastructures. So the dollars should follow need. When we talk about soft infrastructure, we're talking about policy. How can we upgrade our social networks and safety nets so that we don't let communities fall between the cracks, whether it's health, housing? That's what the justice movement and the justice frame has brought to this climate. It's not really debate. discussion.
Right, so that's a great setup, Dr. Bullard. Let's unfold this a little more. We know that the Biden administration says that they believe climate change is real and that they want to use millions, trillions of dollars to make sure that we are preparing, we are creating cities that are adaptable, resilient for the future. What does this mean? What does this really mean? What are these conversations like? How can these investments benefit our communities? We haven't seen that in a long time. So what is it? Help us, both you and Mark Magana. I know Mark Magana was in conversations recently with the administration. Help us understand.
Okay, let me take age privilege and go first.
Do it.
The Biden administration appointed 26 members to be part of what's called the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, WEJAC. There are 26 of us on that WEJAC. And it's pretty much represented in terms of geography, race, ethnicity, gender, etc. And they even have a 17-year-old college student on it, very young. The goal of that council is to advise the administration as it relates to issues around as we move from this oil and gas dominant economy and transition to green, clean, renewable energy. And as we talk about addressing justice issues, health, et cetera. And the administration came up with this concept of Justice 40. Justice 40 basically saying 40% of the investments and funding and benefits as we move to this new economy, this energy, clean energy driven economy, 40% of those investments and benefits should go to what they're calling disadvantaged communities. We call them environmental justice communities, left behind communities, communities that we have that have been struggling to get part of the American dream, et cetera. So what we say is that we cannot use the same metrics. We can't use the same measures. We can't use the same standards, how money gets allocated if we use the same old way of where money should go. The way it ends up is money follows money, money follows power, money follows whites. And if we look at this whole scenario, and there's studies after studies that show that federal funds after major disasters, for example, hurricanes, floods, earthquakes, et cetera, $10 billion disasters on average, events. For the last 10 years, white communities on average end up $126,000 better off after the recovery dollars go in, whereas communities of color end up $29,000 worse off. And the reason for that is cost benefit analysis used as the sole metric for sending money to where, quote, that can come up with these proposals. And what we're saying is that there should be another, an additional metric, such as the Center for Disease Control, CDC's Social Vulnerability Index, SVI. And what the environmental justice community and the WEJAC, the council that a number of us serve on, has said that cost benefit analysis will not get us to where we need to get to Justice 40. We need another, an equity lens. Look at communities that have been left behind historically for decades, in some cases more than a century, and use that additional metric that can talk about vulnerability. And those communities that have been communities, workers, institutions, organizations, et cetera, that have been left behind, including our historically Black college university, Hispanic serving university, Indian serving universities, have been left behind. And so when we talk about that metrics of sending money toward need and making sure that the money, when the money comes from the feds, that it don't always just get sent to the state, to the governor, so the governor can cut out those communities that are on the ground. Like here in Texas, if the money comes to the government in Austin with a governor that's Republican, and our cities in Texas are blue, they will punish our cities. So we're saying that equity lens should cut through that politics and allow resources to flow to those communities that have been in need for decades, from housing, transportation, to clean energy, food security, water security. You start naming all those things, and the need is there across the board.
That's an interesting point that I hadn't considered. That thing, like how money is distributed after an extreme weather event, is really based on a formula created by a very privileged group. And now we're using that formula to give out money in cities that are predominantly disadvantaged, right? Underinvested communities, Latino, African American communities, Asian communities, right? So that is something that the group that was put together by this administration is really looking into, and an important part of it. Aside from, again, also infrastructure, Mark, right? Like it's more than it's roads and bridges. How does resiliency look like in the infrastructure conversations that are happening on the Hill?
Well, I mean, I want to amplify what Dr. Bullard said. A lot of what we're talking about right here is about environmental racism in our country. And we did have the good fortune of meeting with the president and the vice president and several of their leading staff a couple weeks ago. And we really emphasized about how his administration and Congress right now could pass the most far-reaching environmental and climate policies in U.S. history. Well, I mean, unfortunately, there's not much of a history to compare it to, but they could. And these policies could go a long way to fighting climate change and, as Dr. Bullard mentioned, environmental racism in our country. And that includes efforts like what the WEJAC is doing and Justice 40. But the key word right now is could. And we're in the fight of our life in Congress to pass some of these policy goals, not even the far-reaching ones, not even the ones we need, but even moderate ones we're in a fight of our life to address. And this isn't about the legislation, this is about the people. These policies actually could hurt or could help people that have been fighting systemic racism in our communities for years and will be fighting for years to come. And so we need to hear from LULAC member voices to ensure that we're letting Congress and this administration know that we need the most progressive action to tackle the moment, the environmental degradation and environmental justice we need at this moment. And so we need to write and do social media and call and letters. And now's the time to tackle the climate crisis. There are things, aspects that are in the bipartisan infrastructure plan that are good. We're making a big investment in clean drinking water and wastewater in American history, the biggest investment, replacing the lead pipes, investment in public transit, investment in electric school buses, and addressing some of the legacy pollution with the Superfund site in brownfields and some abandoned mines and oil fields. But we need to do more. We need to look at what we possibly can do in the budget reconciliation plan and pull the Democrats together to be aggressive, be audacious in the work, in the time that we have left to be able to find solutions for our children and our grandchildren.
Yeah. Could I also add, thanks, Mark. Could I also add the fact that when we talk about schools, infrastructure, schools were given a D- by these civil engineers, a D-. Our future, our children, that's our future. And with this whole COVID and with this Delta variant just running rampant, many schools in our communities, in Latino communities, in African American communities, in Asian American communities, Native and Indigenous communities, we know the schools are inadequate when it comes to infrastructure, when it comes to ventilation, when it comes to being able to having a space to social distance. And so it should be a no-brainer when we talk about let's make sure that our schools are safe and so that we can have our kids go there. We should be talking about having all of our schools be platinum, LEED platinum. You know what I'm saying? Green schools. And when we green up our schools, we improve achievement. We improve the learning. We improve the the GPAs, all of that. And we know that's a basic. It shouldn't be an argument. So that should be in the reconciliation. And there are other things like that. It's like low hanging fruit. That should not be a major debate. It should be just let's get this done and move on to something else.
It's so basic. You're right.
Yeah, learning institutions, right? Like there is money available right now to make sure that we are creating environments that are livable, that are clean, that are good for our people, that are putting us at an equal footing, just an equal footing as the rest of society, right? And you mentioned something, Mark, very important on the pressing and how pressing it is to do this now, right? To activate our voices on the ground now, because the time is running out very quickly. And you as insiders or have an ear to what's happening are letting us know that, or sounding the alarm to let us know that we need to act, because there is a closing window and we need to have our voices be heard. What does that look like? What have you, I know that Mark, your team has led a Latino letter to Congress where you outline key priorities of the Latino community to the administration and key investments that need to be had. What else do you think is important for our members to know?
Well, I think it's really important to acknowledge that while we have been talking about and a lot of attention is being paid to the bipartisan infrastructure bill and to budget reconciliation process, we still have very difficult political circumstances where our campaign finance system has really corrupted the political will to work on this issue, to work as our people are demanding for clean air, clean water, basic life necessities, and it's not being addressed properly. Why? This issue should not be a fight. This issue should be a sacred issue that there should be no debate. And the fact that we're having a debate lends us to know that the federal pathway is not our only pathway, that we need to be resourcing and paying more attention to the local frontline communities, the work that they're doing, the advocacy that they're doing, the fights that they're doing, so we can make changes regionally, locally, in cities, counties, and communities where we're really seeing that this firsthand effect has communities rising up. And if we don't resource these communities, if we don't resource these campaigns, if we don't give them the attention that they need, that's a complete loss of this generation and the future, because we've been too focused on federal programs and the hope that the federal government would step in. It's up to us as individuals, as people, to bring this fight locally and bring these campaigns what they need to be successful. And that means activism. We can't be on our couches. We can't be on our cell phones. We need to be on the streets. We need to let our elected officials, our appointed officials, our leaders know that we're demanding change, and we're demanding at every level of our government.
Yeah, I think it's important also that Mark hit right on the nail on the head. The local part of mobilization will drive the national agenda. And I think it's important that people understand, and I know they do, and they know the urgency of it, that the same forces that's driving environmental racism, systemic, the same forces are driving voter suppression. And so when you start connecting those forces that are trying to deny communities the right to breathe clean air with all of this pollution being targeted for our communities, and the same forces that are trying to deny people access to health care, it's the same forces that's trying to deny people access to the vote. And so we have to not only multitask, and having a lot of balls in the air at the same time, we have to make sure that we bring young people in, millennials, or they call them Gen Xers and younger. I'm a boomer, and I'm proud to be a boomer. I came out of the 60s and we were fearless. But millennials and younger right now outnumber boomers in terms of numbers, and those numbers need to be really mobilized to the point of saying we cannot allow our communities basically to be disenfranchised, and in terms of resources, in terms of voting, in terms of with the new census numbers out, with the numbers up, it's very clear where the power and the numbers are shifting to. And we have to make sure that untapped power and numbers and resources flow to where the needs are, and not be apologetic, not somehow be defensive, just to say, this is the way in terms of those numbers, what it represents. And we have to make sure that resources flow to those numbers. And it's going to be a fight. We know it's going to be a fight. It's always been a fight. That's why we have to reach out and have this intergenerational mobilization. When we work together across the generations, that's when we are most powerful.
Dr. Bullard, tell us about those numbers. I think with so much going on with Afghanistan, those and the IPCC report, those numbers really fell through the cracks, but they're important.
Yes, the census, America is very diverse and is becoming more and more diverse. And the fastest growing population and those numbers that have been changed, the sharpest, is Latinos in America. That scares a lot of people. And my thing is, what's that? I mean, where's the fear coming from? And that we should be celebrating that diversity, and we should be celebrating making sure that we are building a strong America. And Biden administration's Build Back Better. We also have to build back much fairer, more inclusive. And when we talk about how our cities are changing, our metropolitan regions are changing, and we have to fight. We have to fight for when it comes to redistricting, because they're going to try to cheat, and they're going to try to minimize the numbers and the growth in terms of population. And as you start to reapportioning, I have a PowerPoint that's an excellent PowerPoint, and it starts with 1820, a map. Was the Missouri Compromise, when because white people couldn't vote, and we were slaves, and we were counted as 3/5 because of wanting to suppress those numbers in terms of the South, in terms of what's happening. If you look at the fact that 3/5 concept is not just in terms of African Americans in this country, but trying to somehow minimize those numbers and suppress those numbers so that they don't have to give the right amount of representation on the ground to those populations that's growing and changing. That's what we have to fight. And it's the same fight as we talk about making sure that our communities have equal protection when it comes to environmental protection, making sure that resources flow to those communities in terms of FEMA dollars, Army Corps of Engineers dollars, and other monies that's dealing with climate impacts. We have to make sure we have to fight for every dollar, because if we don't fight for it, it will go to those other, quote, shovel-ready projects that have been biased as to who can fill out good applications, who can get in and do it online, who can do it, and everything is stacked. There is still a digital divide in this country as to who has computers and who can get access to those resources. And that's why our universities have to have partnerships with our communities. Community university partnership, that's a strong kind of relationship that has trust and had been able to produce results. And it's going to have to be, as I said, it's going to have to be a struggle and a fight where we don't apologize for positions that we take, because this is life and death, and this is urgency of right now.
And Dr. Bullard, the powers that have power right now are not going to give it up easily.
No.
They are going to fight. And it's a situation where they are going to add to the disinformation campaign to try to divide our communities, to try to pit us against each other for crumbs, like crabs in a bucket. We try to pull each other down. And that's not the truth. That's not where the truth is. The truth is that we live together. We breathe together. We worship together. And we're going to have to fight together to make sure that the pie is bigger for everyone. It's not smaller slices. It's bigger pie for everybody. And so we got to remember that despite this disinformation campaign that you see and some of the fear that's out there, that's vital. That we got to lock arm in arm in lockstep together to make sure that everyone has a better future. Thank you.
That. I totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah. It's about, great point, Mark. It's about making the pie bigger, right? And right now we have an opportunity to do it and a political will to do it also, but it will require a lot of young people who have been at the margins, have been at the sidelines, to engage in the conversation and form activism, like you mentioned, Dr. Bullard and Mark. And I'd love to paint a picture of what is possible. I feel like we can't work on something that we have never seen before. I'd love for you both to give us a picture of what does climate investment under this infrastructure plan, what could that mean for our communities? I don't know who would like to go first.
Yeah, I mean, the infrastructure bill we're looking at, and even more so, hopefully more investment in the future, means that the clean energy sector could create millions of jobs at all skill levels, and that there is a high level, as we both mentioned, of Latino representation in construction work that's related to clean energy production and energy efficiency. What we need to advocate for and keep a watch out for are the opportunities in the higher paying jobs in the green economy, those that may require STEM education. Those are where Latinos, African Americans, Indigenous, Asian populations are severely underrepresented, and we need to grow with that. So the prospects for growing with a green economy are huge, especially across metropolitan areas with growing populations and emerging green economies with governors and mayors who believe in the future for their communities. And so watching this growing segment of the labor force is something that we need to make sure that now we're investing in education and training for Latino workers, and that's accessible to our communities, because it's going to be necessary for us to advance equity and ensure that all the benefits of this clean, renewable energy economy are accessible to our communities broadly.
Yeah, I agree. My grandmother always told me, and she only had a 6th grade education, but she was very smart, and she said, education is the key to almost everything when it comes to addressing opportunity. And I think when we talk about investing in our people and having that be, a priority, and looking at that investment as something that we are going to do from the very beginning all the way up to whatever the skills are or the degrees are, whatever, and making sure that those doors are open wide and that the net is cast, far and wide, so that we're not just trying to get that, quote, talented 10th. We're trying to reach all of our young people so that we can say, no, America has a potential, and our goal is to reach that North Star and justice for all. And we've never gotten there. We have a great Constitution, but we've never lived up to that. So we should be trying to strive to make sure that opportunity for all will drive it. And as our nation changes, we should be making sure that those barriers that have stood in the way are knocked down, one after the other, after the other, after the other. And so that there should be no artificial barriers that would somehow keep a person from achieving to their fullest. And it might sound idealistic, but that's how America is going to be able to compete on a world stage, by ridding our nation of those just artificial things that are put in the way just to slow somebody down, or to track them into an area and say, well, you have a job that's not going to pay this level. We should be talking about paying people not minimum wage, livable wage. We should talk about making sure that health care for all. We should making sure that we have, college access. And as it turns out, in some of the, the reconciliation negotiations, free community college. That's a start. And college, community college used to be free in California. As a matter of fact, universities used to be free in California. But I won't call the name, but the initials, Ronald Reagan, put a stop to that. So we have to talk about how issues can resonate in a way that people on the ground can say, yes, I want a piece of that. And I'm going to work hard and get a piece of that, so that my children, my grandchildren advance even farther than where I am. And that's how you build, a nation that's really inclusive, that's fair and just and equitable. That's a democracy.
Dr. Bullard, that's a great point. I'm from New York City, and in New York City, public education, public college was also free until the 70s, right? And then all of a sudden you had to pay for it. Those are the things that we don't talk about, our history, right? And how Medicaid happened in a year, right? It became a thing in a year because of civil rights activists, when people said, no, it's not possible, we can't do it. And then it became a project that materialized in a year. And that's the kind of attainability that we can get with some of these solutions. Mark, you mentioned green jobs. And education is important, but we know that some of these jobs are already being had. Our community is already working in them. They're weatherizing, they're working landscaping. Can you talk a little bit more about the green jobs opportunities and that are right now available and that could grow with more investments from this administration in this infrastructure package? Or you, Dr. Bullard, I know that you've met with a couple of groups that are already working on community solar projects around the United States and are bringing in people to get them going.
Well, yeah, thank you. There are so many paths through which an individual communities can contribute in the green energy sector, in the environmental careers. You could be community organizers, policy analysts, environmental engineers, urban planners, activists, fundraisers. There's so many different types of environmental issues across where young people coming into the job sector, or people who are having a just transition from fossil fuel industry can move into. And these opportunities are only going to be increasing as we really face the greatest challenge for our future, the climate crisis. And so we have to kind of focus on an individual or a community on where they believe they can make a difference, and at what scale, whether that's local or federal or public or private sector, in an office or on the ground. But people need to work in community to be able to find out these opportunities, to be able to help each other get into those opportunities. But for right now, through the bipartisan infrastructure deal, as I talked about, we're talking about billions of dollars replacing the nation's lead service pipes. So, the pipe fitters, the labor unions, good jobs there. And then modernizing our transit and replacing transit vehicles, especially school buses, with electric school buses, huge opportunities. And so these things are happening in our communities, And so we need to be part of that job growth. But whatever we do, we need to make sure that we integrate equity and justice into our work, and to build that perspective regardless of what sector you're working in, because these structural inequities are often not addressed in periods of transition and crisis like we're in now. And they just carry over and get compounded in the new system that emerges. And we can't let that happen as we grow this green energy field. We need diverse workers who can bring this unique perspective and experience to assure the success and benefits are accessible to everyone.
Yeah. Just to add briefly, because Mark really covered it. There's occurring right now across all fields, retirements, boomers, baby boomers, my generation. We're exiting the market, the workforce, and there is already a tremendous need for having trained individuals to start filling those positions right now. I'm not even talking about those new positions that are coming online or they're being prepared for, planned for. We're talking right now. So there is a tremendous need for having young people ready, trained, to ready to go. And I'm not talking, having a 4-year or PhD college. I'm talking about trained, ready to go, high-paying jobs that can support a family, that can put you in a bracket, income bracket, where you can buy a home and become part of that American dream, that can stabilize community with homeowners and create this livability. So the multiplier effect of doing it right, it makes economic sense, it makes a justice sense, it makes a health sense, it makes total sense. So I think that's why we have to get our organizations, our NGOs, our educational institutions, our faith-based organizations, our unions and others to really sign on to making sure that justice lens and that equity lens is applied to all of that money, those billions of dollars that are now being pumped into public rail, roads, schools, solid waste, stormwater, transit, wastewater, aviation, bridges, dams, drinking water, energy, hazardous waste, inland waterways, levees, and ports. I live in Houston, Texas, and they're expanding the ship channel. That was something dug, artificial bayou dug in the 30s with public dollars, the WPA, under a president that said we're going to do public works projects and make it national. Well, they're doing those projects right now. We have to make sure that our communities that line the ship channel, which is mostly Black and brown, get a big piece of that. Not just workers, but also our business entrepreneurs, our small businesses. So we got to get our small businesses hooked into this so that we're not just talking about good paying jobs, but we're also talking about getting our business entrepreneurs resource so they can compete for those contracts and do this. It has to be really a comprehensive full court press. Like if we were on the basketball court, we're talking about a full court press. And we're not letting anything through, but what we let through, it has to have a stamp on equity, not as a footnote, but as the headline.
Thank you so much to you both. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. This has been such an engaging conversation, but I don't want to leave without having a few last words from you both. I'd love to hear on what you would like to say to our communities as we think about the fight that we are going to head into.
Well, I'd just like to say, well, first of all, thanks again to LULAC for having this panel and this discussion in a timely way, and thanks for inviting me. What I'd like to leave, and especially to try to get a message to young people, that every quest for justice is a race, but it's no sprint. It's more like a relay, like a marathon relay. You run your 26.2 miles, and then you pass the baton to the next generation to run that 26.2. Right now, it's pass the baton generation time right now. And I think young people are ready to step up and at this moment in time, we don't need incremental steps. We need transformative giant steps forward because of
Yes.
the urgency of climate change.
Thank you, Dr. Bullard. We do need that transformative change. I mean, the UN previously reported that we now have less than 10 years to take significant actions to save our planet and our people from a degraded future. Now, they just reported that we've locked in a degree of climate heating that will degrade our lives and our planet for the next several decades, but that we can still move with transformative change now to address the worst outcomes. We are the first generation to experience the worst effects of climate change and the last to be able to do anything about it. We've seen the change that can happen when people rise up with people power. The farm worker movement, the civil rights movement, the abolishment of slavery, voting rights for women. Well, this is our documentary moment. This is where we can rise up. This is where our children will look back at this moment and say, where were you when you had a chance to solve the climate crisis before things went to hell? Were you on the bridge? Did you face the dogs? Did you face the water cannons? Did you strike? Did you do what it takes to save my future? We have to do that now. This is a time that demands transformative change. And don't listen to the people that say it can't be done for this reason or that reason. We put a man on the moon. We won world wars. We healed polio. We vaccinated for pandemics. We created Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. Anything can be done where the people rise up to demand it. So we're passing the baton. It doesn't mean that we're pulling back. It means that we want to support the young people and to move this to the level it needs, the highest level, to be able to address the climate crisis now so that we have a future that's not completely degraded, that is beautiful, that is clean air and clean water and a beautiful public lands and outdoors to enjoy. This is doable now, but we don't have much time. So let's get on it. Let's get on it together with love and joy. And that's what these actions demand. So we're ready to join you, Dr. Bullard and I. We're ready to get behind you and push and do whatever it takes. So
It's an
let's get
exciting
together.
moment. Thank you so much, Mark. And with that, for our LULAC members, get involved with GreenLatinos. They have chapters across the United States. Dr. Bullard and his team also are doing incredible work. There's a lot to get plugged into also with the LULAC chapters. Dr. Bullard and Mark, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you, the LULAC team, for hosting this incredible conversation. We will continue the fight. Thank you all.
Thank you, Esther.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.